Okay.
You're live.
We are live now.
Thank you. It is 3 p.m. We'll call the Budget Finance Committee meeting to order. If I could please have a roll call.
Freeman.
Aye.
Amobian. Malik.
Aye.
Baylor.
Aye.
Lombardo.
Aye.
All committee members are present except for Amobian.
Okay, then we have, if I could have a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We have one old item, if we could continue to take time. And so now we're going to turn it over to, Miss Goodrich, can you kick it off for us here?
I'm actually going to go ahead and have Steve kick it off for you all, even though I know this is a thrilling topic, but I think he had some prepared remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is another in a series of presentations that we've been doing related to the ARPA dollars we received, and this specifically is related to the budget stabilization funds that we got. So one of the big differences between the ARPA funds and the CARES Act funds that we received last year is that the CARES Act funds did not allow for replacing lost revenue, whereas the ARPA dollars do allow for that. So, and that's what the general idea behind this bucket is, to basically, to the extent that we have lower revenues throughout the course of this grant, these dollars would be available to make up those revenue losses. And it's done by performing a calculation that will be done annually. And Sharon Brown is going to cover that from Guidehouse, is going to cover that in the presentation. But the idea is that we'll be doing a revenue loss calculation each year, with those dollars being programmed to make up any revenue losses that we might have. And one of the other things to keep in mind too is, while potentially we will have lost revenues throughout the next few years, we're also going to have increased costs for a number of things. So we're already beginning to see, just like all of us at home are seeing, the impact of the supply chain issues that we're having. The city is certainly not immune from that, and we're already starting to see a number of areas, especially a lot of areas within our service department, in terms of the parts that we need to purchase to maintain our vehicles. Another big one that we're seeing right now is our chemicals for our water plant. Those costs are going up significantly. We expect that the chemical costs for our water plant next year will be about $1.5 million higher than they were this year. So, these dollars, we'll be lucky to have them to kind of make up some of these, cash flow issues that we're going to have due to lost revenues and, increasing costs in a number of areas of our operations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Brown, who's going to run through the general parameters of the budget stabilization portion of the ARPA dollars we received.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. So diving into budget stabilization, taking action in order to put the funds to use as soon as possible. Soon after Treasury released preliminary guidance, the city began developing plans to address the negative impact of COVID-19 to enhance the well-being of Akron residents and essential workers working tirelessly. The city of Akron will help mitigate the spread of COVID-19 by minimizing lost revenue, the American Rescue Plan Act, as Steve touched on a bit earlier, and improving the quality of life for those working throughout the pandemic. So today we're going to dive into two specific ARPA guidelines in reference to what can be done with the grant funding, the revenue loss and premium pay, to ensure that we're working to respond to the negative impact of COVID-19. We're first going to dive into revenue loss and essentially what that is. Before we do that, just ensuring you all understand that Guidehouse continues to serve as a consultant throughout the process to ensure that the city of Akron is not solely in compliance, as well as to ensure that we are presenting accurate information in reference to budget stabilization. We're going to continue to evaluate revenue over the course of the American Rescue Act plan, establish funding which must be expended by 2024 and spent by 2026. It is important not to revenue loss to know that revenue loss funds are not to be used towards pensions. The interim guidance published by the federal government requires that the community, Akron, Ohio, to calculate revenue loss to determine how much funding can be used to administer government services. The calculated revenue loss is not considered direct replacement of lost revenue due to coronavirus, but rather must be used to deliver government services to the extent of the computed revenue loss. Here we have a breakdown of how the calculation works. Step 1, identify actual revenue collected in the base year. We will also be diving into the next slide so you all can actually see what we've put together in Excel to help you all better understand these steps as well. Step 2, establish counterfactual revenue. Step 3, identify actual revenue collected over the past 12 months as of the calculation date. Lastly, step 4, calculate the reduction in revenue, which is equal to the counterfactual revenue less the actual revenue. Note, if the actual revenue exceeds the counterfactual revenue, the extent of the reduction in revenue is set to 0 for that calculation date. To ensure that you all understand how this works, the City of Akron operates on a fiscal year end, essentially a 12-month calendar year, ending December 31st of every year. Revenue loss will be calculated at 4 different points according to the fiscal year established by the American Rescue Plan guidance. The highlighted number in the next slide is an estimate of revenue loss that will vary yearly. As you can see here, here's a timeline of the revenue loss calculation dates, which will take place on December 31st at the ending of every single year. I'm going to now pass it over to Steve so he can give us a breakdown in reference to how we came to the estimated revenue loss calculation at the bottom right of the screen.
All right, thank you, Sharon. So the calculations were done by looking at our comprehensive annual financial report, which are our audited financial statements. They were done. We worked with Guidehouse's accounting partner, which is an accounting firm called Riemann, to prepare these numbers. So basically what it involved was looking at our base year, which was 2019, and then applying percentage growth on that, and then comparing that percentage growth to what we actually received in 2020. And at the end of the day, we came up with an allowable revenue loss figure of about $16.8 million. So it involved looking at the areas that we did lose revenue, and it kind of encompassed the whole city. So you couldn't pick and choose, certain revenues. You kind of had to look at the whole city and the areas, and then it did exclude certain things. So for example, utilities were not really included. So if you look at the enterprise funds component of this, it really only includes the parking operation and the airport operation and our other non-utility enterprise funds. So you weren't really allowed to take water and sewer into account. And then obviously all of the federal revenue that we get in the form of grants, a lot of which was given to us both for our sewer projects in the form of loans that we've been doing for our CSO projects, and then also grants that we got like the CARES Act were also not included. So it really just looked at our kind of our core annual year-to-year revenues and not kind of the one-time revenues that we get. So at the end of the day, we ended up with, as I said, a revenue loss figure for 2020 of $16.8 million. But as Sharon gets onto the next slide, we'll see that this is just the first in a series of annual calculations that we will do. Okay. Oh, I forgot we moved that slide. Yeah. So yeah, that's right. Yeah. So as I said, the calculation will be done. Let's try and go back one more just so I can see this. Yeah. So the calculation will be done. We did it, this year for 2020. Then we'll do it 3 more times for 21, 22, and 23 throughout the course of the grant. Oops, Sharon, you're on mute.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry about that.
No
So now
problem.
we're going to dive into premium pay. Premium pay is used to respond to workers performing essential work during COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers who served on the front lines, providing services to the community during the pandemic. The city of Akron essential workers who worked tirelessly during the pandemic are the emergency services, firefighters, police officers, and dispatch services are all eligible for premium pay. The city of Akron may provide premium pay to pay retroactively for work performed at any time since the start of the pandemic, which took place as of March 3rd, 2020, and not prior. Premium pay must be in addition to wages and compensation already received and not serve as a bonus. Throughout the pandemic, first responders and essential emergency workers have served on the front lines to help protect our community. Akron, Ohio, 17,000 emergency workers were exposed to COVID-19, causing a strain on multiple emergency departments due to quarantine mandates. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Steve to speak about the premium pay.
Right. So premium pay is something that we are looking at right now. Because we do not have the final guidance yet from the federal government, and we do expect that this is one area that might have some more clear language about the structure of the premium pay program. We're not making any decisions yet on what form of premium pay we might look to do, but just something that we are looking at this, and we are awaiting that final guidance from the federal government.
Perfect. Now we're going to jump into any questions around budget stabilization.
Questions or comments? I see, let me start with Mr. Malik, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fricker, Ms. Goodrich, and Mr. Brown. Two questions. So the calculation that we're making, $16.7 million in the first year, and we're going to make, I guess, 3 other calculations. Say that it just was 16.8 million every year. My bad lawyerly math is $67 million, right? So is the idea, so what proportion of the ARPA funds do we intend to spend in the revenue replacement section? And then the second half of the question is, what are some of those, costs that will it specifically will it be applied across the board? Will it be applied in specific programs? How does that work? Because what if I'm understanding, we're essentially saying is this is kind of like unlocking a different mode of spending the money than the uses we've talked about in public safety or in housing or what have you. And that's not to say that it's not worth it. It's just kind of like, it's like, say it's $60 million for 4 years. That's an option to use $60 million at our discretion for those things. Am I understanding that correctly, Mr. Fricker?
Yeah. So as you said, it is an option. So, we have our allocation from the federal government. We have this amount that we can use for revenue replacement. We don't have to, but, I think in answer to your general question of how much are we planning to use, I think that remains to be seen. I think this is, the bucket of money that we're waiting to see what the revenues that we realize over the next couple years. And we'll be fortunate to have this available, in the cases where we may not have revenues to fund our general operations that we typically would. So if our taxes fall, or if our property tax or the local government money we get from the state, or any of those kind of general revenue sources that we've been receiving, for the past several years, and are kind of our core bread and butter revenues. If any of those are impacted, then these dollars would be used to replace those.
And so and thank you, that's helpful, but kind of that second question, so it would be kind of a direct replacement for specific, say, our income tax came in, this lower, or the chemicals are costing X dollars more. There would be specific kind of replacement like that targeted.
It would, yes. I mean, potentially just to keep the general operations of the city continuing as we have for the past several years. So we may run into a situation where just to keep, our general service levels up, we need to utilize this revenue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Amobian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fricker and Mr. Brown, and thank you, Ms. Goodrich as well. Help me understand, I know we've talked about those workers that are working from their home as opposed to coming into the office and how that may negatively impact our revenue. Is this included in the 16.8 that you're referencing, Mr. Fricker?
That's a scenario that might result in, yes, that's a scenario that might result in us utilizing these dollars to replace income taxes lost.
Okay. And this is always done at the end of the year versus quarterly?
It will. It'll probably, because it's prepared based on our financial statements. So for example, next year, we typically complete our financial statements in late spring. So it would probably be mid next year when we do the calculation for 2021, for the revenue loss for 2021.
I see. Thank you very much.
Steve, let's say the sun just shines on the city of Akron and we don't experience heavy losses and we come ahead, farther ahead on revenue than we had anticipated. So those funds would not be used for that. We are not saying these funds can be used only for any shortfall that we have. We would just reallocate through.
That is correct. Yeah. So we don't have to use them for this purpose.
Okay. Okay. Very good. All right. Looking for any other questions? Ms. Holland, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the helpful presentation. As to the premium pay, was that an exhaustive list of potentially eligible workers? In other words, emergency services folks, including fire, police, dispatch, or are there other types of jobs that would fall within emergency services?
That is the majority of the city workers that would qualify under the guidance that we receive. So it mainly involved, certainly people that did not work from home, that they were out in the field. So that's a key criteria, that you have to be actually, working out, not from home. It primarily involved safety force workers in the case of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Fricker. And I do understand that you're still awaiting guidance and that this is a pretty enormous task, just, trying to figure out a way to do this. But if you feel comfortable talking about it, can you give us a general idea about scenarios that are being considered? For example, is it a straight pay kind of calculus, or is there some exploration of other intangible benefits that are being offered? Can you give us an idea?
I can tell you that the other cities that have implemented it have really done it in the form of straight pay.
Okay, helpful to know. Thank you.
Most likely scenario, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Fusco.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thanks for the presentation, the information. One quick question, on the income and expense sheet that we had seen, and there was a discussion in reference to the enterprise revenue. Did that include, and maybe you said it and I just missed it, did that include the utilities?
It does not. Yeah, so the guidance specifically said that utilities are excluded from the calculation. So it did not include water or sewer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And then I would like to learn more. I appreciate the questions from Councilperson Holland in reference to the premium pay piece. Having gone through this, these last 19, 18 months, 20 months, whatever, I do recall that we did have and just hearing the stories, you know, about a lot of our police, fire folks, they were all in harm's way. Many families went through the COVID early on. Whenever a lot of us were, you know, kind of sequestered to our homes, we stayed in our homes, but they were out there fighting the good fight every day. And many of them, you know, and that's why that calculation piece is interesting to hear, you know, how that would be calculated. So yeah, look forward to hearing more information reference that. And the other piece, and I don't know if this would be included in this bucket, but the one thing, and I've said this before probably, and I know many of my colleagues share the concern, is, you know, it seems as though we have gotten behind on quite a few things in terms of complaints, nuisance type things, you know, just because of COVID. I believe that's a big portion of it. People missing work, you know, the housing division, I think someone mentioned that, maybe Mr. Malik, you know, just complaints in general. And so, and I do realize and respect the fact that we don't want to, you know, hire a bunch of people and then only to lay them off in a couple of years. But I think it'd just be prudent to figure out a way, if it can even be done. I don't even know if this is a bucket or not, but, you know, figure out a way to bring in folks to get caught up, at least at minimum, and then kind of, you know, figure it out from there to maintain. But just seems as though that would be prudent. So,
you know, and that is something that I think that we will be looking at throughout the course of the 2022 budget, is something that we're beginning to look at right now. You know, one of the challenges is actually, you know, the city, you know, is in the same boat as a lot of other employers in terms of actually finding people to hire, which is part of our problem. So, I mean, I think that, you know, that's something that needs to be taken into account, but it is something that we are, you know, looking at for next year's budget.
That's fair. Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks.
Steve, coming back to Councilwoman Holland's question, for the essential workers, is that the additional income, is that going to be, is that ordinary income, or you may have said, is it counted as ordinary income? Is it bonus pay? How does that work?
It typically, the other cities that have been doing it have typically been doing it in the form of like a bonus payment. So
okay, is there a PERS responsibility to us on that money as well?
So that is one of the things that we're looking at in terms of whether or not, and it sounds like that's a little bit unclear at the point. I've heard differing opinions on that, on whether it's considered pensionable wages or not. That's something that we are examining right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr.
It potentially
Malik?
differs between the two pension systems.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just echoing Councilwoman Holland and Councilman Fusco, you know, I think we last budget cycle, we heard a lot of stories of folks who really went several extra miles in making sure that essential city services continued. I know that includes, you know, a lot of the people here on this call as well, but particularly safety forces. Mr. Fricker, is there any information available, maybe like, you know, not necessarily right now, but that could be shared on some of that research? You mentioned some of the other cities, you know, summarizing what some of the other cities are doing and, you know, the amounts that they're, you know, expending in with regard to premium pay.
Yeah, we can kind of, you know, and I'm aware of a few, you know, some of the larger cities have done some premium payments. So we can, you know, pull some of the information that we've heard about from, you know, other cities in the state and provide that to council.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Presentation. Thank you for everything. I know this is very much a work in progress, kind of some furrows that nobody's plowed before. So we continue to look forward to information coming in. Am I missing any hands, Sarah?
I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your presentation. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of one another in the future. And if there's nothing else to come before us, we will adjourn at 3:24.
Thank you.
This is the final committee meeting of the day. Council will meet at 7 p.m. tonight. Thank you.